convierta en rayos y más allá, a través de la gran oscuridad y más crecemos en número, en solo un trueno de horizontes, seremos miles, más y más allá, a través de la gran oscuridad, hasta que me convierta en rayos, y más allá, a través de la gran oscuridad.
Every day we escape, losing all of our faith. We can't live this way. Feel me slowly fade away. Feel me slowly fade away. As far as the wind will take me. Every day I feel time slipping, passing, skipping by. All the words I could say just can't really seem to stay. Feel me slowly fade away. As far as the wind will take me. Every time I divide all the fractions of my mind, take away all the pain, give myself another day. Give myself another day. Every day I decide if we'll ever see the sign. I ignored all the lines showing me eternal light. Showing me eternal
The night has come, it's cold and losing my control. Your light is gone, and lonely darkness fill my soul. I wish that you could save me from my isolation. It's way too complicated.
Buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Mi nombre es Brenda Valdés, soy miembro del directorio académico de la carrera de Arquitectura y Urbanismo Ambiental. Y en esta oportunidad les doy una cálida bienvenida al taller internacional Diseño Biofílico, Introducción y Técnicas de Aplicación a cargo del profesor William Browning. Arquitecto André Neri, les cedo la palabra.
Gracias, Brenda. Buenas tardes con todos. Es un placer nuevamente encontrarnos en esta primera semana de bioarquitectura de nuestra carrera de Arquitectura y Urbanismo Ambiental. Hoy día tenemos el gran placer de empezar este taller de diseño biofílico, un tema que a mí es muy caro y a ustedes también saben cómo es importante en el mundo actual, no solo pensar en un diseño bioclimático, sino ir un poquito más allá, pensando en el ser humano, en la persona y su relación directa con la naturaleza. Y diría, no en pocas palabras, que el estudio que representa Bill Browning acá es uno de los grandes exponentes mundiales sobre el tema de diseño biofílico y que conseguimos y tenemos el gran agrado de que pueda explicar, ¿no? Y en esas 3 horas, 2 horas y media que vamos a estar con ustedes acá, todas las investigaciones, los hallazgos y los grandes trabajos que ha hecho en este campo en Estados Unidos y otras partes también. Sin más, ya les dejo que presenten su currículum y podamos empezar nuestro taller. Y bienvenido, Bill, de nuevo a Científica.
Bueno, haremos una pequeña presentación al arquitecto. Will Browning es uno de los pensadores y estrategas más destacados de la industria de la construcción ecológica y de bienes raíces, y un defensor de las soluciones de diseño sostenible en todos los niveles de negocios, gobierno y sociedad civil. Su experiencia ha sido buscada por organizaciones tan diversas como compañías Fortune 500, universidades, líderes, organizaciones sin fines de lucro, el ejército de los Estados Unidos y gobiernos extranjeros. Sus proyectos de consultoría incluyeron nuevas ciudades, complejos turísticos, renovaciones de edificios y proyectos de demostración de alto perfil, incluido el EcoMart de Walmart, el Greening of the White House, the National Aquarium, Disney Hong Kong, el Pentágono, Lucasfilm, Grand Canyon National Park y la Villa Olímpica de Sydney 2000. Del mismo modo, en el 2004, Will fue el director de diseño y medio ambiente de Haymon, una sociedad New Urban en Virginia. En esta capacidad dirigió la planificación del sitio de desarrollo, fue autor de un conjunto de pautas de diseño y guió el desarrollo de sistemas de infraestructura innovadores. Siguiente. Bueno, del mismo modo presentamos a Terrapin. Terrapin es una firma consultora multidisciplinaria que se especializa en servicios públicos cuidadosamente considerados y política corporativa, estrategias de desempeño ambiental y desarrollo verde. El diseño biofílico es un enfoque importante en sus esfuerzos de investigación y consultoría. El equipo de Terrapin ha publicado La economía de la biofilia, porque diseñar con la naturaleza en My Makes Financial Sense, en 2012, 14 patrones de diseño biofílico, y Nature Insight, una guía de diseño biofílico, junto con otros artículos sobre diseño biofílico. Bueno, sin más que añadir, le damos la palabra al arquitecto Bill Brown.
Thank you so much. Buenas tardes. Gracias por la invitación de la semana de bioarquitectura. Perdóname para necesito hablar en inglés. Thank you so much for asking me, and I'd like to start so today is an exploration of biophilic design. Our agenda is several steps. The first portion is an introduction to biophilic design. The second portion is a series of, is an exercise in which you'll go into breakout groups using a design process that we use with our clients. After that, that exercise will take about 20 minutes. We'll then dive into biophilic design patterns and interventions. And then the second exercise is actually applying those interventions to a space. And then after that, we can have a more in-depth conversation. So hopefully this will be a fun experience. And let's start with the introduction to biophilic design. Certain spaces just seem beautiful to us. We kind of don't have to be told that. They can be extraordinary experiences. And the question is sort of, why do we respond this way to these experiences of nature? The term biophilia comes from the social psychologist ARQ, and it's from the two Greek words bios, life, and philia, love. And the working definition we most commonly see for biophilia is this one from Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson. And the key piece is this sort of innate connection to nature that we feel as humans. There are a number of branches of science that that are involved in biophilic design. One of the branches of investigation is called prospect and refuge theory. It comes originally from the work of landscape geographer J. Appleton in England. And back in the 1970s, he asked the question of why, if I'm looking in one direction, I'm seeing a view and I really love it, but I just turn 90 degrees and what I see is not pleasurable. I don't like it so much. What are the components that cause that reaction? And some of it has to do objects within the view plane, but one of the keys has to do with the spatial experience itself. And one of the key components of that is a condition he calls prospect. Prospect is an unimpeded view through space, a view to the distance. Turns out to be really important for reduction in stress, perceptions of safety, and also getting you to explore a space. The other condition is a condition he called refuge. And this is where your back is protected and there may be some canopy overhead. And if I can combine the two together, like here on the Savannah of Africa at the Grumeti Reserve. So here I'm sitting with my back is protected to a wall. I'm under this beautiful overhang and I'm looking out across the Savannah of Africa, copses of shade trees. You see grazing animals out there. I can see water. I can see distant mountains. It's a really quite extraordinary experience. And so that's an experience in which I have prospect and refuge together. Another question is what actually is happening within the brain as we are viewing nature and experiencing nature. And for a very long time, even going back into the mid-1800s with, if you read the writings of landscape architect Olmsted, who's most famous for the design of Central Park in New York, but when he was working on two national parks for the US Congress, what became Yosemite and Mariposa Grove, he said, being in nature relaxes me, but enlivens me and changes the way I feel about these places. And so if we bring that forward to the work of Stephen and Rachel Kaplan in the 1990s, they defined a state called attention restoration. And they propose that when you are experiencing nature, the brain is operating in a different mode. You're experiencing in a state called soft fascination. And what we know from neuroscience today is that when I'm in that state, a portion of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, actually quiets down. And so when I come back and I need to focus and have better focus and better attention, I now have better cognitive capacity. And so it's a restoration function within the brain. One of the questions for a very long time was how much exposure to a view of nature or to nature directly do I need for that to occur? How long does it take for that portion of the brain to quiet down? Is it 15 minutes? Is it half an hour? Is it 5 minutes? Is it an hour? And what we've learned from a team at the University of Melbourne in Australia is that it actually only takes 40 seconds of seeing a view to nature for that to occur. And so this is the situation that we had. This photograph is actually our original office in Manhattan, in which we installed a 40 square meter green roof, which was one of the first green roofs in New York City. And the office was designed so that pretty much every desk had a view to the green roof. Even just the patterns that we see around us impact us. And so there's one branch of work around fractal patterns. And fractals are mathematically repeating patterns at different scales. And you may have seen Mandelbrot sets, or what are called fractal gaskets, which are these mathematical exercises. But more typically within nature, you see self-repeating patterns that aren't exact each time. So if you think about the structure of a snowflake, there's a mathematical repeating pattern there that occurs at different scales there, but it's not exact each time. Or like the leaves on the fern, or the waves coming into a beach, or flames dancing in a fire. And it's intriguing because we are really hardwired to those sorts of patterns and that sort of movement. And so if you think about it, there's sort of no rational reason why we should be fascinated just staring at a fire for hours. But what's going on in the brain is really highly praisable. When we experience fractals in things around us, the brain is predisposed to be able to process those much easier. So it dramatically lowers our stress and increases our pleasure. So if we can use fractals in even just fabric design, but in components of space around us, that has an enormous benefit. The term the scientists use with this is fractal fluency, literally meaning the brain is fluent with these sorts of patterns. We're also interested in how we respond to sound. And in particular, we got interested in nature sound and the impact of nature sound. If you think about a busy space or think about a busy office with an open plan, there are a lot of voices in there, and that's really distracting, and that's really hard on productivity and getting work done because you're getting distracted by other people talking. And so the question is, what would be the best masking sound to use in an open plan office that would be most effective for our brains? And so work done by the Fraunhofer Institute in Stuttgart in the psychoacoustics lab there, they did a series of experiments of what would be the best masking sound in an office space. And they tried white noise, pink sound, instrumental music, flowing water, bird song, and active noise cancellation. From a pure acoustic standpoint, white noise is actually the most effective masking sound. But we have to back up and separate that from what the brain chooses to listen to. So and acoustics is really, really important, right? It's important how loud things are and how they echo into space and how noise gets to us and what sound comes to our ear. That's really important, but it actually doesn't tell us what we're hearing. So to give you an example, pre-pandemic, when we could all be together in a bar or party with our friends, there are conversations throughout the room. And yet somehow you're standing with your good friend and you're having a conversation and you can hear them and they can hear you. What you don't realize is simultaneously, all those other conversations are still coming into your ear, but the brain is choosing which one to focus on without you consciously having to do that. And so that's the difference between acoustics and psychoacoustics. So if we run the noise experiment again in an office setting or other public spaces, what we discover from a masking standpoint, by far the best, most effective masking sound is actually flowing water, like a little stream or a small waterfall. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, that makes perfect sense. As humans, we can survive almost a month without eating food, but we can't live more than about 72 hours without water. And so it makes sense that we are attuned to that sound of water, and we'll pay attention to that sound and screen out many, many other sounds. Now there's another interesting one as well, and that's bird song. And in public spaces, if I'm trying to help people feel more safe, actually playing bird song can be incredibly effective. Now, some of that has to do with sort of a reaction. When you are in a forest, in a natural environment, and it's filled with birds singing, if the birds all of a sudden stop singing, it usually means there's a dangerous predator around. And so we're attuned to be very happy and feel more comfortable if we're hearing lots of bird song. So another psychoacoustic example. As designers, we tend to focus on what does it look like. So we're also interested in the response of touch and temperature and airflow and things like that, other experiences of nature. In particular, and this is a French term, alesthesia, is looking at how the body responds to differential temperatures. And we find that in spaces that have gradients of temperatures and different materials with different surface temperatures, we are much, much happier, particularly if we can move around to the temperature that best suits how we're feeling or what we need at any given time. And so there's a whole interesting branch of research around this thermal experience. And the example of differential, different parts of the body are more sensitive to temperature than others. In particular, there's one place that's most sensitive to temperature and most accurate for temperature, and that is right here on the wrist. And if you think about it, if you're testing the temperature of the milk in a baby's bottle, where do you do it? You put it on your wrist, because actually that's the most accurate and most sensitive place to temperature in your entire body. And so there's work now, for instance, in hot offices cooling people off by just simply having a chilled metal bar on the desk that you can rest your wrists on. And that chilled metal bar, the blood that's flowing from your arms goes straight back to the heart. And so that actually transports that cooling energy into the core of the body. So we've learned from all the science that there are sort of 3 different areas in which we tend to see the responses. We see physiological responses. A lot of these have to do with stress and stress reduction. We also see a whole category of responses around the brain and cognitive performance. And we also see that biophilic experiences impact mood and our emotions and spaces and can be used to really improve those outcomes. We've kind of learned 3 important things. The first one is that if I'm doing biophilic design, I want to see if I can engage multiple senses simultaneously. It makes the experience much, much more memorable and much more intense if I can access multiple senses simultaneously. Another would be, can your design create an emotional connection to space? And I think from a sustainability standpoint, this one's really important, because if we can create buildings that people really love, they're buildings that people will take care of and will be around a very long time. And the third thing that we've learned is that sometimes we'll see when people are starting biophilic design, they'll try to do as many different interventions as possible in one space. And we've kind of learned that there's no science to support quantity. What's more important is coming up with one really well thought through, beautifully implemented intervention in our design. That turns out to be much, much more effective. So we'll take a stop here and happy to take any questions.
¿Alguna pregunta, chicos? Parece que todo claro, Bill. ¿Entendieron todo?
Okay. So why don't we will start, get ready to start the first exercise. And so first, let me walk you through this process. And this is a process that we use with our clients when we're actually engaged in projects. And so I'll give you an example of that in work. So we really like storytelling and creating a narrative. So the first step is we think about who are the different people who might use my space, and create a profile for a description of who that person is. And the next step is we envision a day in the life or what they might do in that space over time. And then the next step is we then map how they move through the space, how they use the space onto our floor plan, onto our plan. Then we want to see if we can align that experience of the space to the priorities. Is the person stressed? Is cognitive performance really important for them? Is supporting mood or emotional support most important in that space? And make sure that we figure out where we want to do interventions that would support those outcomes. And then finally, we go to a matrix of design solutions and apply those to the space. And so that's some of what we will be doing. So here's one of those profiles. This is for a project that we're working on in Portland, Oregon. It's the redesign of a large airport, the core terminal of that airport. It's a space that is about 40,000 square meters. So it's an enormous space. And lots of passengers are coming to this building to then get on airplanes. But there isn't just one kind of passenger. There are lots of different kinds of passengers, and they have very radically different experiences. So the business person, she may arrive in a ride-sharing system. She already has her ticket on her mobile phone, so she does not need to check in. She's carrying her baggage, so she doesn't have to drop off baggage. She has a pre-screening clearance, so her path through security is much simpler. And she kind of has everything she already needs, so she doesn't need to do much but get to her gate and wait at the gate. So she actually doesn't really get stressed until she's sitting at the gate wondering if the plane is actually going to be on time. Now, I contrast that with a family with young kids, and that's kind of chaos, right? They come, they get dropped off at the curb, and they've got to get everything out of the vehicle, and they got to get the kids in the strollers, and they got to get all luggage out. They go to the kiosk to check in everybody. They may have used the curbside drop off for luggage, which is helpful. And then they got to corral the kids and get through the security screening process. And they really don't get a break until they get to the children's play area where the kids can play and everyone's stress is lowered. So when you look at this matrix, what you'll notice is that some of the boxes are shaded in, and the shaded areas are where these people are stressed. You'll also notice at the bottom of the box is a hashed line. Those then are translated, the path of those people and those lines is then translated to the floor plan. And so this is the floor plan. This is the new core terminal for the Portland, Oregon airport. And you'll see the different paths of the different types of passengers. And you'll see the hash lines are where those people are stressed. You'll notice there are some areas where lots of hash lines overlap. And so that tells us the optimal places for biophilic design interventions. Because the space is so enormous. I mean, this is the scale of a stadium plus several city blocks. It's enormous, absolutely enormous. And so as a result, we don't have the budget to be able to do biophilic design interventions everywhere. So we look at the optimal places to do that. And so one of those places is this area where all the traffic necks down as they come out of the ticket hall and check-in and baggage drop area, and they prepare to move towards the lanes for security. And so here's what that space will look like. It's actually a forest with a skylight over it that you come through after you come out of the ticket hall. You come through this narrow gap, and this narrow gap has a forest in it with amazing light coming through the skylight. And the roof structure of this entire building is all made from wood. It's a mass timber construction. Another place where we need some assistance or stress reduction is after you've gone through security, which you can see in the image here. Security is there, and this is what you come out of security, and this is what you see as you come out of security, this distant prospect view, planting, great daylight, and interesting places to go visit. And so this is taking that, that process and applying it directly. So we've split everyone into a series of teams. Each team will be given a different user, and that user is already defined for you. But you need to then create the walkthrough of the space. Describe how they proceed through the space, how much time, the dwell time, how much time they spend in each of the different spaces, the key activities they might do in those spaces or within the larger building, and the state of mind to that. And then we then move to annotating a floor plan, which we'll come to a little later. So here's our space. It's a train station with a big ticket hall, and then the concourses, dining room, and a series of other components to it. And so each of you will have a different user who is coming to the train station, and many of them will need to get their tickets, figure out which track they need to get to, and we'll have some time to spend in this train station. Here in English, and you'll fortunately get this in Spanish, but here's an example of that. And so our user is a family hoping to go on a fun trip together. And then here are the different things that sort of their day in their life as they are coming to the airport and getting ready to eventually get on the train. And then down below is a chart that you'll have to fill out, that is the different spaces that they might experience over the course of this. And what you need to do is figure out how much time on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the shortest, 5 being the longest, they might spend, so the dwell time in each of those spaces. Then rating 1 to 5, what's their stress level in each of those spaces? And also, how important is, what's the cognitive demand? How important is it they really need to pay attention when they're in that space? So, Andre, are we ready to take people to their breakout groups?
Sí, Brenda, que es quien va a dividir los grupos. Brenda, te pongo como, ¿ya tienes la división?
Arquitecto, disculpe, pero no estoy como anfitriona, no me salen las opciones.
Perdón. My mistake. Ok. Ya estás. El material ya también lo
so this is a 20-minute exercise. Let's take about 20 minutes for this exercise, and then we'll come back and talk about what some of the groups learned out of this.
Exacto. Brenda, ¿tú asignas los grupos?
Sí, arquitecto.
Ok.
voy a asignarlos a las salas.
Has asignado a Bill también, ¿no?
Sí, me sale para asignarlos a todos, arquitecto. Ya pueden ir ingresando, chicos, a sus salas.
Pero asignaste a Bill, entonces yo lo voy a traer acá. Sorry, Bill. Te asignaron allá en la sala, sin querer. Brenda, ¿ya compartiste con ellos el ejercicio? Es en la carpeta.
Sí, es exactamente, arquitecto. Les acabo de compartir el documento al grupo que tenemos con los
Ok.
participantes. Lo
Ok.
pueden descargar, por favor.
Ok. Es el primer ejercicio. Washington, Mayra y Juan no tienen grupo.
No me sale para poder añadirlos.
A ver.
Sale, arquitecto, que todavía no han ingresado.
Sí. Juan no ha entrado. Juan, ¿estás ahí? Juan y Mayra, para que vayan haciendo, que tenemos ya 15 minutos más. Y Mayra. David, tú también, David, Juan y Mayra tienen sala asignada para que puedan hacer el ejercicio. ¿Tú compartiste las cinco carpetas, Brenda? los 5 ejercicios.
Les he compartido el documento que usted me había pasado al grupo.
Ya, toda la carpeta.
Exacto, toda la carpeta les he compartido.
Ok, entonces voy a escribir un mensaje. Bill, ¿por qué son 6 grupos? En tu documento estaba como 5. Entonces, podemos hacer que el grupo 1 sea repetido en el grupo 6. ¿No hay problema? Ok.
Yeah, there are 5 users, so if there are more than 5 groups, it's totally fine to have 2 groups using the same user. They'll probably come up with different solutions, which is always interesting.
Bill, ¿quieres hacer una visita a las salas o esperamos que entren? Vamos hasta las 5 en punto, ¿verdad? Y retorno a la sala principal. How much time, Bill? 5 minutes more?
Yeah, I think we're
10 minutes, I don't know.
yeah, no, I think we're down to 5. Yeah.
Okay.
When people are sent to the breakout groups, you can preset the time, and it will give you a warning about a minute before everyone comes back.
Okay. Let me see this. No.
Yeah, it'll close. It says down below it'll close in 50 seconds.
Yeah. What my mistake? Okay.
Which is no, that's probably accurate.
Fue un tiempo muy breve, creo, ¿no?
Muy breve, ¿terminaron?
Estábamos ahí recién en estrategias.
Recién estrategias.
Sí, arquitecto.
A ver. Ahora. Todos están acá. Ya, les doy más unos minutitos entonces.
Sí, unos minutos más porque están abriendo recién los archivos.
Ya, ok, perfecto. Entonces déjame. Bill, I give you the control. I don't know
Okay.
if better for you.
Yep, sounds good. Perfect.
Okay. One moment, please. They need some minutes more. And now I'm gonna give you the control.
Okay, do we have most everyone back? Yeah, appears that we do. Great.
Yeah. We have control now.
Okay, great. So we realize that 20 minutes sometimes is not enough time to do this, but hopefully you had a good conversation. It would be great to hear from some of the groups a description of who your user was, what their day in life was, and where they spent their most time, where they were stressed, and where they needed cognitive demand. So just sort of randomly, could someone from, say, group 2?
Maybe, Bill, I think they are still in the groups because just only 13 people is in the main room. You need to close the breakout groups.
Okay.
I give you the control now.
Yeah, or if you can go ahead and close that out, close the groups. Yeah, Andre, I don't have access to the breakout group, so that'll.
And yeah, you have full access. Maybe at the bottom in the 3 points. More. Where,
Oh, breakout rooms. Yep.
yeah.
All right. Okay, it says they will close in 50 seconds.
I don't know how to fix the time.
All right, I can just set a timer on my phone for the next one.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we have everyone back.
Yeah. Chicos, yo sé que no todos han terminado, ¿ya? Pero Bill va a explicar la siguiente dinámica y ahí los que no han terminado todavía le ponemos continuar. La idea acá es ver en qué han podido avanzar, ¿no?
So it'd be great to hear from some of the groups. First, let everyone know who your user was, a little description of them, and then a brief description of their day at the train station, where they were stressed, where they had cognitive demand, and where they spent their most time. So group one.
Grupo 1, ¿se puede compartir rapidito lo que han conseguido? Solo el primer ejercicio.
Arquitecto, disculpe, yo estaba en el grupo 1 y recién estábamos empezando, en realidad no tenemos mucho avance. Estábamos empezando a trazar el recorrido de nuestro usuario.
Recién empezando a trazar el recorrido.
Así es, arquitecto.
Buenas tardes, le habla Jesús del grupo 8. Me gustaría, por favor, que si alguien de mis compañeros, lo poco que tenemos, podemos proyectarlo para poder un poquito mostrar la estrategia que estábamos tomando para poder analizar el tema de los recorridos, de la frecuencia o ocupabilidad, como también estamos tratando de llamarle a los lugares ¿no? De mayor concurrencia de esta familia. Por favor, si alguien lo puede proyectar.
Great.
I think you need to stop sharing, Bill.
Yeah. There we go. So were there any problems in the process? Did the process make sense?
¿Me pregunta a mí, al grupo 8?
Sí.
Yeah.
Bien,
¿Puedes compartir?
en un primer momento, lo primero que pensamos fue en una estrategia para poder ver cómo podríamos atacar mediante colores, primero, el tema de la frecuencia de ocupabilidad. Ahí está, qué bueno. Gracias, compañero. Bien, utilizamos 3 colores. Fue por un tema de tiempo también. Verde, amarillo, rojo. Verde es flujo muy bajo, amarillo moderado y rojo muy alto. En un primer momento incluso esta palabra quisimos cambiarlo. Si era flujo, tal vez otra palabra podría ser concurrencia, ¿no? O ocupabilidad, ¿no? Para ello,
Yep.
por ejemplo, tratamos de observar, ¿no? ¿Cómo podríamos generar esto? Pero sin embargo, lo primero que tuvimos que pensar fue cuál es la cantidad del núcleo familiar. 4 personas, 6 personas, y quedamos en que iba a ser 4 personas. ¿Listo? Entonces, flujo muy alto, ¿no? Vendría a ser el tema de, podría ser la entrada. Le ponemos flujo moderado al lugar del ticket lobby, producto de que hoy en día, y también vamos a decirle que gracias a la pandemia, se están utilizando cada vez más los dispositivos móviles para acceder a un ticket, ¿verdad? Entonces, el tema del lobby, estamos considerándolo como moderado, producto de que ahí no deberían de haber mucha frecuencia, ¿no? O de frecuencia de ocupabilidad de las personas, ¿no? Para que accedan a un ticket. O sea, serían personas que tal vez no manejen la aplicación o que hayan tenido algún problema de aplicación que vendrían a adquirir su ticket, ¿no? Entonces, los flujos muy altos se desarrollarían principalmente en las entradas, ¿no? Los moderados serían en los lugares de arribo de los taxis, ¿no? Y acá yo creo que, no creo que nos entendimos muy bien, pero le está poniendo flujo muy bajo al Suburban Platform, de lo cual estamos en un sí y un no con respecto a ello, producto de que en este lugar es donde para subir al tren se genera una gran cantidad, ¿no? De concurrencia de personas, una gran cantidad de ocupabilidad. Entonces, por lo pronto, lo que desarrollamos fue esta estrategia: colores, cantidad de familia y los lugares donde más van a frecuentar, ¿sí?
I think that's a great approach, and it definitely makes sense, and it addresses, sort of the amount of time or the amount of, to a certain extent, stress or effort on those different zones, and definitely a good way to approach it for a family of 4. Let's go to another group, maybe group 2.
Grupo 2. O algún grupo que esté un poquito más avanzado, no sé si el 2, el 3, el 4, el 5. ¿Nadie? ¿Ningún grupo? ¿Vamos adelante?
We could go on. Why don't we move to the next stage then? So the results from this first exercise will help inform the second exercise. So let me share screen. So the second portion is a discussion about the biophilic design patterns directly. When we comb through all of the science, we find that the science sort of points us into three different categories or groupings of experience of nature. And so the first would be what we call nature in the space. And these are direct experiences of water. So views to nature, plants, animals, water. These are direct experiences of nature in the space. The second, natural analogs, are representations of nature. So it might be the use of biomorphic forms. It might be the use of natural materials like stone and wood and bamboo. But it also might be patterns that are tied to those mathematical patterns that occur within nature, like the fractals and biomorphic forms. The third category has to do with the three-dimensional space itself and how that impacts us both psychologically and physiologically. And so out of that, we developed a pattern language. And pattern languages have been around for a very long time. Going back several hundred years in Europe, you will see pattern books used by builders and designers back into the 16 and 1700s. And those are typically patterns that are objects. And so this is a slightly different approach, partially based on the work of Christopher Alexander. This is a series of patterns that are based on experiences. And so these are 15 different experiences that the space that you're designing can create for people. And so here are the patterns within those three categories that I described, and make it a little easier. Here they are in Spanish. So visual connection to nature, non-visual connection to nature, experiences of non-rhythmic motion and senses, variable temperature and airflow, the presence of water, dynamic and diffuse light, and connection to natural systems. Then within the analogs, forms and patterns that are biomorphic, connection to natural materials. So this is the use of natural materials. And then complexity and order, which has to get at the fractals and the complexity of the space. In the spatial conditions, prospect, refuge, mystery, risk, peril, and the experience of awe. And so I'll give some examples of those. So one of the things that we, for us, is important to remind people is that 15 patterns is an awful lot to remember. And so, and I wouldn't try to use all 15 in any one design or any one project. What we can do instead is do outcome-based design, where we define what the outcome is that we want to support for our users of the space, and then use this chart to determine which patterns and what sort of outcomes we can derive from implementing that pattern for those users. And so it's a good filtering mechanism and a tool that we use all the time. I won't go through all 15 patterns, but I'll go through just a few. The first being visual connection to nature. This is the one that you see frequently used the most. And, you know, it can be living plants, even an aquarium inside a space. It can be a painting. It can be a view to a beautiful landscape through a window. Many, many, many different ways of experiencing this. One of the things we have learned is that we have to think about, you know, what's in our view plane, so the cone of vision, but we also have to think about biodiversity. One of the things that we learned in A View to Nature, if it's more biodiverse, it's much more interesting. I could do an entire wall of the same plant as a green wall, and it could be huge. And that would be interesting, but it's far less interesting than something that's maybe only a quarter of that size, but has a whole biodiversity of plants within it. That will get us our attention much more. And some of the biologists that we work with have said that probably that the reason that we have that kind of response is that when you see a huge surface, all of the same plant, that's a monoculture. Those don't occur that frequently in nature, and frequently when we do see a monoculture in nature, it's not a healthy ecosystem. But when we see a high level of diversity, that's usually a healthy ecosystem. And so the brain tells us that, oh, that's a healthy ecosystem, so this must be a good place for me to be. Some of the responses that we see, lower blood pressure, increased neural activity in the parasympathetic nerve system, definitely improved engagement and attention. And people just are happier and feel better and have a better appreciation when they're experiencing nature. So here is a planting that's actually in a meeting room in a tech firm in San Francisco, and it's highly biodiverse, and it even, some of the flowers even have scent, which makes it even more interesting. But that's the visual, a strong visual connection to nature. Even just thinking about things like orientation. So this is a hospital room designed by Canon Design. And normally the bed would be flat against the wall and the wall would be perpendicular to the window. But if I'm laying in a bed, to see the view out the window, if it's perpendicular, I have to make an effort and turn my head to be able to see that. And if patients are stressed and in not great shape, that's, you know, doesn't make it easy for them. But if the bed is placed at an angle like this, then I don't have to move my head to be able to see that view out the window, see that view to nature. The angle in this was determined such that both the patients could easily see out the window, but also a nurse walking by in the hallway could still see the patient's face as well, which is really important in healthcare. And then here's another example of a view to nature, this incredible mural going up this stairwell in an old house in New Jersey in the United States. Non-visual connection to nature. You know, I'm a designer. I will almost always go, oh, what does it look like? And that's okay, because 80% of the brain's processing capacity, sensory processing capacity, is devoted to vision. So we need to remember that, that let's also get the other senses in there, taste and smell and touch, and what sound and temperature and all these different ways that we have of sensing beyond visual. If I can do that together with visual, it's so much more powerful. And what we've seen is that when we experience nature with this, we see improved immune system function, lower blood pressure, lower stress. We tend to be more creative. so better cognitive creativity, and improved mood, and also pain management. So some examples. On the left is a store called The Forest. It's in Milan, in Italy. The company is called Valextra, and the space was designed by the Japanese architect Kengakuma. And so it uses these large slabs of wood with live edges. And so you see the wood grain, you see the texture of the wood, you can touch it. But it also, most interestingly, the wood is highly aromatic. Even though the store's been open for a number of years, you can still smell the resins and the compounds coming out of the wood. And it's one of the things that people remark is makes that space most memorable. In the center is Paley Park in New York City. And it has at the back of it this 10-meter wide water wall. And the sound of that water is just absolutely extraordinary. You can even, and it masks out the noise of the very busy 53rd Street that's at the entrance of the park. And the noise is so compelling that you will be walking down the street and you'll hear the water well before you can even see the entrance of the park. And it just sort of draws you to it. Touch. So these are the handles on the door going into one of the tallest skyscrapers in Manhattan, the Bank of America Tower. It's a beautiful steel and glass building. It's like shards of glass or crystals. So it's very sort of hard-edged and crystalline. But when you walk up to the building, as you go into the building, your first direct experience of the building is your hand goes on this handle, and the handle is oak, white oak wood with a heavy grain in it. And so as you enter the building, your hand, you feel the wood grain, you feel the warmth of the wood, and you feel the texture of the wood. And that's your first direct experience as you come into that building. Water. We mentioned a little bit before, but water just elicits an incredibly strong response. And there's so many different ways we can experience water in a space, you know, seeing it, hearing it, touching it, particularly if we can touch it as well. And so, and there are so many different ways of doing water as well. We know that having water in the space really, really reduces our stress. And we see this through lower blood pressure, lower heart rate, an increased feeling of tranquility. We also know that having water in the space and experiencing water leads to a really improved cognitive performance. And we also see that spaces that have water are spaces that people really prefer and have a really powerful emotional response to. So an indoor water feature that you may just see the water and the patterns of the water, or you can actually touch it as well. The sound of water again, or in this, the example on the right, this is a coffee shop in Beijing and called Seesaw Coffee. And it has a moss garden. And to keep that moss garden alive, twice an hour, you get misters that create this fog and this mist over the garden and then the space. This incredible temporal experience of water. Biomorphic forms and patterns. This is where, when we see these sorts of patterns and these sorts of contours, it's much easier for the brain to process. Similar to the fractals, we're very fluent with these sorts of shapes and forms, and it elicits a very positive response. We can even using skin testing, see a change in electrical current on the skin, galvanic current, and see stress reduction almost instantaneously when we experience this. And examples, one of the best example would be the work of Antonio Gaudi. Really, really biomorphic forms. So it can be decoration forms in a space, like here, Hotel Tassel in Belgium, done by Pierre Victor Horta. A Tiffany lamp. This is what they called one of the spider lamps. Or even just the quilting of fabric into biomorphic forms. There's so many different ways that we can create objects and surfaces and designs that use biomorphic forms. Natural materials. We really love natural materials. And when preference research is done, both visual preference and emotional preference for building materials, you see a really positive response to stone and wood and leather and natural fabrics and all that, that we don't see with plastic and a lot of metals. We're not quite sure why we have that response, but that's something that we're really investigating. Some of it may be, for instance, with wood, is that the brain sometimes does what's called processing by association. And so the brain goes wood, tree, alive, and I like life. So wood, tree, alive. It may be that, or it may have to do with the fact that the grains and patterns and things that you see in natural materials are hard to replicate in human materials, and they also aren't the same again and again and again. They have a really nice level of variability to them. So think about this textual tiling using natural marble, or the amazing banding and texture that you get using rammed earth. Or here's in the Bank of America again, in the core wall of the main lobby is lined with Jerusalem stone. And that stone is full of fossils. And it's really amazing to see children come into that bank lobby and take their fingers and trace the fossils on the wall. As you come into the core elevator lobby, the walls are lined with leather. And the leather is something that was intentional. They knew that over time people would touch it. And over time, you see these patterns of patina starting to form on the leather. And so it's aging gracefully, but it also tells you that it's a building that people are loving and interacting with and using. Spatial patterns. So we mentioned this before, but prospect, that distant view. It's even better if I can put something at the other end of the view that will get my attention. But prospect views are really great for perceptions of space, of safety. Prospect views can be inside, they can be views to the outside. It can be ordered. So in the New York Public Library, the arrangement of the reading tables really sets it up for that view that draws your eye through that space. Really quite extraordinary. In this office, I don't have a view to the outside. So I have a piece of sculpture that's terminating the view that captures my eye and sort of draws me through that space. Or on the right, going back to our old office, that unobstructed view out to the green roof and the landscape of Midtown, of Chelsea and Manhattan. Refuge, where my back is protected, I may have some canopy overhead. Really great for perception of safety, and people really, really love this. You know, if you think about it, if you think about classic restaurant design, a lot of time in the center of the restaurant, you'll have the round tables. And then around the perimeter of the restaurant, you might have high back booth seating. And, you know, if you ever watch where people want to sit in a restaurant, quite frequently, their first choice is that high back booth. That's a great refuge space. If the booth is raised up on a little plinth, 1 or 2 steps up, now I also have a view across the whole rest of the restaurant. And so now I have prospect and refuge together. Refuge can be done with just one object, like a chair. This chair is a great experience of refuge, or it can be done in larger spaces. And so here, if I'm sitting along the edge of this alleyway where I've got this really fun installation of all the umbrellas, I've created a really great refuge space. Or here's an example on the right of what's called an ingle nook by a fireplace. And this is in the architect Frank Lloyd Wright's house in Chicago, his personal home. And Wright was really good at creating refuge spaces in his buildings. So we'll do some case studies. This is a restaurant designed by Ibuku. They're based in Bali. They use a lot of bamboo. And this is a restaurant that he designed, the Tree Restaurant, which is in Hong Kong. And so here you have these great refuge seating areas floating in a pond in the middle of this restaurant. Here's a view to nature. Some of the earliest science on biophilia was the work of Roger Ulrich, who saw that patients who had a view out of a window to some trees versus the patients who had just a view to a brick wall, both of whom had had the same operation in the same hospital, the patients who saw the view to nature, on average, got out of the hospital, recovered 1 day faster than the patients who just had the view to the brick wall. And so this insight leads to an entire movement in design called healing gardens. And we see these in hospitals around the world. And this one maybe takes it to an extreme. This is Khoo Teck Pat Hospital in Singapore. And what we're seeing here is the roof of the clinical room wing of the clinics. And this roof is a huge organic garden run by people in the surrounding neighborhood. Across from that, we see the patient wing and the wards, the rooms for the patients. You'll notice that some of them actually have their own little sky gardens, but all of them have the view both to this roof with all the organic gardens in it, but the space between these two buildings is a rainforest garden with a stream running through it, which you can see in the image to the left. So this is creating a really phenomenal visual connection to nature. Hospitality. So this pattern has a visual connection to nature, has great prospect, has complexity and order. We did a study of how people responded to biophilic design in hotels. And one part of that study was looking at the hotel lobbies. And the question that we were asking was, does the presence of biophilic design change the way people use hotel lobbies? And so we did observational studies in 3 hotel lobbies in the middle of Manhattan, all of which were roughly the same size hotel with sort of the same price point. 3 of them were conventional, and 3 of them had strong biophilic design. And what we were looking at was, were people transient? Were they just moving in and out of the space, maybe checking in, checking out, but just moving through the space, not spending any time in the space, not significant time in the space? Were they a passive user? Were they sitting and quietly and just enjoying the space, maybe working by themselves on their computer? Or were they an active user, meeting with a friend, getting a drink from the bar, getting something to eat, but actively using that lobby? And what we found was that in the biophilic design lobbies, there was a 36% increase in the number of active and passive users. And in the case of this hotel lobby, Citizen M, more than half, 54% of the people using that lobby were active and passive users. From the economics of the hotel, this is phenomenal, because it means that the longer I can keep people in my lobby, the more likely it is they're going to buy a coffee or a glass of wine or get some food. And so those are great ways to increase the revenue of a hotel without having to have more people having rooms at night. This was an experiment that we did in a 6th grade math classroom in a public school in Baltimore, in Maryland, in the US. And it was looking at minimal interventions in this classroom and would they potentially have an outcome. And so the interventions were very simple. We added carpet tile to the floor that has a pattern that looks like waving grass on a prairie or a pampa. We added wallpaper strip around the top of the room that is an abstraction of palm leaves. And then on the windows, we replaced Venetian blinds with fabric blinds, but those fabric blinds have printed onto them the patterns of tree branch shadows, which form what are called the statistical fractal. And so we know that from research, each of those different things should lower people's stress. And what we found was that in interviewing the teacher and interviewing the 125 students who use the classroom, their stress level, they said they felt calmer in the classroom. And when we compared academic performance of those children over the course of the school year in that classroom compared to other children who used that classroom in prior years with the same teacher teaching the same curriculum, we found a dramatic improvement in academic performance. We also did biometric measurements of stress recovery, and we found, compared to a control classroom where we didn't make those changes, the students in the biophilic classroom, their stress level was lower at the end of the class than it was when they first came and at the beginning of the class. And that was not the case in the control classroom. And then this is a building that was just completed last year by Thomas Heatherwick in the UK, and one that we think is really quite extraordinary. In the public hospital system in the UK, when you get a diagnosis of cancer, obviously it's incredibly traumatic. And a patient realized that the sort of information and care and that and support needed for cancer patients is different than a lot of other patients. And the public hospital system really didn't provide that. And so they're building these centers called Maggie centers at hospitals all over the UK. This one was designed by Heatherwick. And so when a patient gets diagnosed, they come here and they get counseling, they have support meetings with other peers, they get information on treatment, and it's really quite extraordinary. It's a highly biophilic space. That's essentially like 3 trees with gardens on top of each of these trees. Inside of each tree are the private meeting rooms, and then the space between the trees are the public meeting spaces and the gathering spaces for the center. It's really quite an extraordinary building. So, any questions?
Teníamos una pregunta. Buenas tardes, muy agradecido con este taller. Actualmente me encuentro, Sebastián Wong, el alumno. Me encuentro realizando mi tesis en base al diseño biofílico como herramienta de bienestar en los espacios recreativos. Y quisiera saber, en base a su experiencia, cómo el diseño biofílico influye en ese tipo de espacios recreativos.
We're seeing nature-based playgrounds occur in a number of places. And one of the things we're seeing, and there's work, particularly there was work done in Barcelona looking at school children and cognitive development in schoolyards that had more trees and more tree canopy. And what they found was that the children in the schoolyards with more trees, and it had nothing to do with the income level or the demographics of the children in the schoolyards with more tree canopy had an improved level of cognitive development over the course of the school year.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Sí, tengo una curiosidad, por favor.
Sí.
Sí, veo que este tema del diseño biofílico, de alguna manera, para poder entender el resultado, ¿verdad? Se tiene que pasar por un proceso de análisis, podría ser psicológico, ¿no? Cualitativo, cuantitativo a las personas que habitan estos lugares, ¿es verdad? Entonces, me llama la atención justo la tesis del amigo, lo que comenta, ¿no? ¿Cómo es que él abordaría, ¿no? El tema de que su espacio es totalmente biofílico, es totalmente armónico, digamos, en el caso del hospital, ¿no? ¿Cómo se tiene que hacer un estudio de psicología o qué tipo de estudios se desarrollan, ¿no? Para poder decir de que realmente este espacio está aportando en la salud, ¿no? Esa sería mi pregunta, por favor.
Yeah, the health one is a little harder to measure, but we, particularly in office spaces, do post-occupancy evaluation, which is done through a series of surveys, questions, and interviews with the users of the space, looking at specific outcomes. Sometimes with some of the clients, it even involves looking at the healthcare rectors of the whole company, not individuals, but seeing, is there a difference in healthcare outcomes, or things like, are people, what's the level of absenteeism? And so some of it is trying to, do measurements of what's most important to the organization that you're working on. So but we really are very strong advocates for doing post-occupancy evaluation, which unfortunately in architecture, so frequently we design a space, it gets built, we hope it works, and then we move on to the next space and don't actually get to do measurements and that. So it's one of the reasons why in biophilic design, we will use this process of outcome-based design of, going back to looking at the science that says, okay, if I do this intervention, hopefully I should get this outcome. If I can do measurements, great. But a lot of times we don't get that chance, unfortunately.
Creo que
Okay,
no
shall
hay
we
más preguntas.
shall we move to the second exercise?
Sí, yes.
Okay, so this second exercise is now then taking taking the information that you generated the first time and using it to figure out and maybe choose where you want to do an intervention and thinking about which pattern might best support that. So if there's a space where people really need to be paying attention, what pattern could I implement there that's going to help cognitive performance? Or if the person might be really stressed in a space, what's the pattern that I might use to lower their stress? So here's an example of another group where we looked at stress. Oops, sorry. So we took the results from all different groups' charts and found these different averages. And one of the things we noticed is that from the ticket lobby, if they don't already have the tickets, that can be really stressful. We also looked at cognitive performance, and in particular, one of the places that we kind of really need to pay attention is if there's a ticket kiosk, but also if there's a train display that tells you which track the train is on. But for the dining space, cognitive attention isn't quite so important. The other is then also thinking about where are people spending the most time. And so that then tells us where we might want to think about doing some intervention that improves their mood and enhances their mood. And so if they're using the dining hall, you'll notice that they're probably spending a fair amount of time there. So going back, here's the chart again, and you should have a copy of this that shows where different patterns support different outcomes. So this is an example going back to our airport again, and the results there. And the exercise that we want you to think about is take your space type. So basically step 5, decide what your desired outcome is, the impact, then figure out which patterns you might want to use, and then think about how you would implement that pattern. So this exercise is in some ways a little bit more fun than the first one. And so if you're ready, let's go back to the breakout groups. And again, we'll have 20 minutes for this exercise.
Disculpe, ¿podría volver a repetir, por favor, la pregunta?
So are we, can we take people back to the breakout groups? We move them back to their breakout groups now?
Vamos 20 minutos, chicos. Ahora, segundo ejercicio. Y ahí, los que no terminaron el primero lo concluyen ahora rápidamente. Tienen 20 minutos para hacer el segundo ejercicio, que básicamente es utilizar los 15 patrones de biofilia, de diseño biofílico que acaba de explicar Bill, junto con el análisis previo, ¿no? Y intentar llegar a ese worksheet, ¿no? Con las priorizaciones de espacios de acuerdo al análisis que hicieron y buscar cuáles serían las soluciones de diseño biofílico más apropiadas para la estación de tren que ustedes tienen como objeto, ¿no? ¿Ok?
No se encuentra lo que son las salas de grupos reducidos.
No, Bill va a crear ahora las clases, las breakout groups. Un minutito.
Oh, I have to create them.
Yeah. I don't have access. You have the full control.
Okay, sorry, I put a few too many people in one of the rooms.
No problem.
So Andre, maybe sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'd love to have a conversation about your PhD.
Oh, of course. I'll call you.
It would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Then after your workshop, we have Phil Tab. I don't know if you know him.
Oh, Phil's awesome. Yeah, I will see
Yeah.
Phil next.
He wrote Biophilic Urbanism.
Yep.
Can I talk about this?
I will be with Phil next weekend.
Oh, great.
At Serenbe.
Serenbe.
Because I help run the first charrette that led to Serenbe. So
Okay.
we're working on a hotel project there. So
It's a great project, Serenbe. It's near Washington, no? Or in Georgia?
In Georgia, near Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Yeah, very close. Actually, very close to the airport in Atlanta.
Oh, okay. Just give me 2 minutes. Bill, question: do you work with green certifications like Live Build Challenge? Yeah.
Muted. Yeah, we help with some of the criteria for Biophilic design, both for LEED and also for living building. And the design standards that we developed for Google are in a few months will be published to the living
Build Challenge. I saw the Google in New York, maybe.
No, they're
Portland.
worldwide. Design standards for their buildings worldwide.
Okay.
And we are doing some work with WELL. We've got some projects where we're using the WELL certification. And then we have a number of projects that are LEED certified.
Okay.
The biggest one is a skyscraper in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. It's
with LEED. With LEED.
Yeah, LEED Platinum. It's 300,000 square meter tower. It's 118 floors, 118 stories. And it's a crazy big project, and it's
I can imagine.
It's the building's topped out. I think they're close to getting the skin all the way up, and occupancy will start probably at the end of next year.
Okay. Here in Peru, we use almost LEED, well, some buildings, and now most of the new buildings are using EDGE certification.
Okay, don't know that one.
EDGE is from the World Bank, IFC, World Bank. It's for undeveloping countries.
Okay. Oh yeah, actually I have seen that one. Yeah. We are starting some projects. Well, I know it's not a certification system. We've got a couple projects where we'll be using the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals,
okay,
as a way of thinking through engaging the project. Some of those, are easy to measure, and others are just, are we implementing them or not? Those we've got some hotel projects, potentially in Haiti, Colombia, and Argentina, where we'll be using the SDGs on those.
Oh, here in Colombia and Argentina.
We've got some of our partners are based in Bogota. They have a group called North Star Green and a nonprofit called CLAT, the Center in Latin America for Environmental Technology, CLAT.
Okay.
And the site we're looking at is near Santa Marta on the Caribbean. And near the Tayrona National Park. So between Santa Marta and Tayrona on the coast.
Okay.
Beautiful area, really beautiful.
I've never been to Colombia, but I saw some pictures from the Caribbean area. So
yeah, it's the parts of the country are really quite extraordinary, beautiful. Okay, we have about 6 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been to, the only places I've been in South America are Argentina, Colombia, and Ecuador.
Ecuador.
Yeah, Quito, and the Galapagos.
Okay. I was born in Brazil. I'm Brazilian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where in Brazil?
No, I was born in Brazil, and for 10 years, I'm living here in Peru.
Okay. Where in Brazil from?
My city is near São Paulo, 20
Okay.
kilometers from São Paulo.
All right.
No, 200 kilometers from São Paulo.
One of my roommates in college in grad school was from Sao Paulo.
Oh.
And over the years we've gotten to know a number of the folks from Curitiba.
Curitiba. I have 2 projects in Curitiba.
Amazing city.
Yeah, I used to have some projects on sacred church in Brazil. It was my field of work in the last 10 years, maybe. And I have two projects in Curitiba.
Yeah, the person I got to know the best was Jonas Rabinovich. He was an architect who worked for the mayor. He worked for Jaime Lerner.
Lerner. Okay, Lerner is well known.
Yeah, so he was the guy who implemented the designs for him. He's not sure where he is now. He was in New York for a number of years, working with the UN, but brilliant architect. Yeah. And then in Argentina, we've been in, most of the time was outside of Buenos Aires, in Pilar, and then also down in Calafate. In Patagonia, which is just a surreal landscape. It's sort of the landscape of imagination. It's so incredible. Yeah, I'll never forget the first time I saw a condor.
It's like a wild place.
Yeah, it's a wild place.
And they have a good meat. For me, like every Brazilian and Argentinian people, we love meat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember the day that our friends took us to a restaurant. They were very excited. They're going, "You're Americans, you will really love this. It has something that no other restaurant in our area has. It has salad." Yeah, it would be a difficult country for a vegetarian. Got a good friend who he and his wife are architects in Mendoza.
Okay.
And they do work homes and have done some work on some of the wineries there. Okay, we have just about a minute left.
Okay.
So when was the last time you were back home?
2 years ago. Well, back home for my family home, no? Because I have home here in Peru, no?
Yep. All right, close rooms. Okay, so they just got the warning. They're
okay, they're ending.
so at home, do you speak Portuguese or do you speak Spanish at home?
Well, my wife is Peruvian, so
Ah,
here they speak at most Spanish, but with my kids, I have 2 kids, we speak every time in Portuguese and sometimes in Spanish too.
awesome.
Hola chicos, ¿cómo estamos? Espero que ahora han tenido tiempo para hacer todo.
So it'd be great to hear from some of the groups. What strategy, what space did you choose, and what was your desired impact, and which patterns did they use, and how did you implement the pattern? Should we call on groups?
Okay.
How about group 3? What did you do?
No tengan miedo. Bill no muerde.
Creo que la disposición de equipos ahora fue diferente. Me encontré con otro equipo, no era el mismo
Ya,
anterior, entonces, nada, pero
claro,
aún así,
el tema es la
aún así
dinámica.
compartí la idea, sí, aún así la idea anterior tratamos de mezclarlo con nuestro equipo, ¿no? Para ello, de acuerdo a la frecuencia o concurrencia, como lo habíamos llamado, ¿no? De estas islas de calor que le estamos poniendo como colorcitos, ¿no? Se hizo una tablita, ¿no? Para poder ver el tema del tiempo de permanencia, el estrés y la demanda cognitiva de estos, ¿no? No
¿Puedo
sé,
compartir?
ahí compañeras, por favor, no quiero ser nomás yo el que lo haga todo, por favor, las compañeras, si alguien está ahí por ahí, Noemi, creo, ya podemos, aunque sea lo poco que tenemos, hay que exponerlo, por favor.
Sí, sí, está bien.
Noemí, por favor.
Ya. Sí se puede ver, ¿no?
Yes, it's great.
Bueno, hemos considerado de acuerdo también al flujo de las personas, del usuario y también su estadía en cada lugar, ¿no? En cada espacio. Por ejemplo, en la entrada, por criterio, las personas solamente están de pasada, no se detienen, lo cual hemos considerado del valor menor. Luego, en los kioscos, en las plataformas, y donde hay mayor, como decir, concentración del usuario, sería en las plataformas de espera. Entonces, de acuerdo también el estrés, que muchas veces estar ahí en contacto con las personas, el movimiento, y que a veces aturde al usuario, también lo hemos tomado en cuenta, la demanda cognitiva de la misma manera, lo cual se puede ver reflejado en los valores que hemos utilizado.
That's great. Which patterns did they choose then?
A ver, chicos, ¿qué patrones biofílicos han escogido después de ese análisis?
Justo eso estamos trabajando, pero así, tal vez en lo escrito todavía no lo hemos considerado, pero sí, estábamos conversando con el grupo más que nada, donde dice la pregunta de dónde pueden tener más impacto las experiencias positivas, serían en los espacios abiertos y un poco en los espacios estrechos, porque muchas veces la persona cuando está en un espacio rígido o tal vez menor, se siente aturdida. Entonces podría usar ahí un poco de tal vez iluminación o alguna textura, algún material, y también el espacio libre para que agrande un poco su vista y no se pierda entre toda la masa de las personas pasando por todos lados, ¿no? Y que te guíe directo hacia el lugar donde tú vas a ir, o al lugar donde te estás dirigiendo, y no te pierdas.
Sí, tengo
That's
una
great.
reflexión sobre este
That's
tipo
really great.
de trabajos. Me llamó mucho la atención este tipo de tablas y veo que es un trabajo detallado, o sea, la intencionalidad arquitectónica, yo creo que eh, no es que pasaría a un segundo plano, ¿ya? Pero yo creo que es muy importante tener todas estas variables, todo este estudio para que por consiguiente se pueda desarrollar recién las estrategias arquitectónicas, como por ejemplo, un tema a discutir con el equipo fue el tema del tiempo de permanencia, y para ello se tuvo que desarrollar primero un tema de variables, ¿no? La variable de cuánto tiempo le ponemos a cada puntaje, ¿no? Por ejemplo, el 1 vendría a ser de 1 minuto a 5 minutos en permanencia, ya bien, ese es el puntaje número 1. El puntaje número 2, de 5 a 10, de 10 a 30 y de 30 a 45 minutos, ¿no? Para de esta manera darle un puntaje a estos, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que ahí es el meollo del asunto, ¿no? En el que es muy importante tener esto antes de, yo creo que proponer ya las estrategias biofílicas, ¿no? Sí.
Claro, con respecto a lo que dijo mi compañero, de ahí ya surge lo que es las estrategias que podemos utilizar, como variabilidades térmicas, la luz dinámica y difusa, luego la conexión no visual con la naturaleza, ya que te da una sensación de estar un poco relajado, conexiones visuales, como lo había dicho, tal vez con algunas texturas o formas, ¿no? El orden, para mantener más que nada eso. Y eso sería.
Yeah, this is great.
Gracias.
This is great. Yeah, clearly, the tools are really about is how do you engage in the process? How do you think through these issues? That's why they're intended as design tools to really, what's the outcome or the impact of our design? Is there another group that would like to talk about theirs?
Sí, el grupo 3. Yo le comparto. ¿Sí ven la pantalla? Ya está. Ok.
Bueno, este sería el ejercicio 1, en la cual hemos marcado en el plano, por ejemplo, el recorrido y con un círculo, sombrearlo, el espacio en la cual pasa más tiempo. Como segundo punto hemos descrito, las actividades que haría desde su ingreso hasta que sale del espacio. Pasa al círculo. Y aquí hemos puesto en un rango de 1 a 5, de acuerdo, por ejemplo, al tiempo que pasa en el ingreso, en el lobby o ticket, en el área de espera, en hall y también en la última parte que es el track platform, y también a nivel de estrés y demanda cognitiva. De esto, hemos utilizado esto para el ejercicio 2. Puedes compartir.
¿Se ve la parte 2? No.
Bueno, en este gráfico, básicamente vemos que hay más demanda pasa más tiempo y también más estrés y demanda cognitiva en lo que es el lobby o ticket. Ay. Bueno, y esos espacios que tienen más problemas, hemos planteado en el paso 5, que es en la tabla en la cual se identifica el problema, y para esto se plantean, los parámetros que nos enseñan en la parte teórica, y por ejemplo en el lobby, en la cual hemos planteado, por ejemplo, el parámetro 6, que es la luz dinámica y difusa. Que el ambiente esté bien iluminada, y también el parámetro 1, que sería la conexión visual con la naturaleza, y también los posibles diseños, en intervención que hemos planteado en la otra tabla, que sería básicamente la propuesta de poner plantas en macetas, por ejemplo, en el interior, más iluminación y también, por ejemplo, sonidos de aves, y también en las paredes podría plantearse lo que es pinturas de la naturaleza, y también se plantea el parámetro 2. En el caso del área de espera, en la cual, la problemática sería reducir el estrés, también se ha planteado lo que es el parámetro 1, el 2 y la 3. Y las posibles propuestas, que básicamente es proponer, vegetación en macetas o bien espacios de área verde, se podría proponer en eso, ¿no? Biodiversidad y conexión visual. En el último, que es sería lo que es mejorar la demanda cognitiva, hemos planteado el parámetro 1, es decir, la conexión visual con la naturaleza, y el parámetro 8, que básicamente es, las formas y los patrones biomorfos. Y la propuesta sería, que como sabemos que para tomar el tren básicamente está en el espacio intermedio entre el interior y el exterior, por lo cual en esto se podría plantear como tipo jardines, biodiversidad, la conexión visual con ese entorno, y también en las manijas o bien los pasamanos también se podría plantear lo que es la textura de madera.
Wow, this is great.
Sí, también aportar que acá en Lima no es muy común en este tipo de ambientes encontrar áreas verdes, por lo cual sería adecuado utilizar plantas, ya que esto puede desestresar a las personas y hacer que el recorrido sea más amigable con las personas, ¿no? Y tanto con el ambiente.
Great. This is, it's very clear that I think these are great solutions and I think they're very appropriate. We are actually right now doing a study on just on wood grain, on what's the brain response to wood grain and why do we have such a positive preference for wood as a material. And it looks that a lot of it has to do with the calming influence of the patterns within wood grain. Fantastic. Does another group want to go?
Muy bien, chicas. Ahora, ¿qué más?
Arquitecto, yo le puedo mostrar el...
Well, if no other group wants to go, I'm happy to spend a little time answering any additional questions. And we also...
mi compañera Rina Camila dice que va a compartir. No sé si me escucha.
Oh, fantastic.
Ya. Ya, bueno, acá teníamos el usuario que nos tocó, que era un viajero extranjero, Peter. Y acá tenemos lo que era la matriz, donde vimos que en la entrada posiblemente no tenga mucho nivel de estrés ni de demanda cognitiva, pero sí en cuanto al área de visualización o a la plataforma de seguimiento, o bueno, lugares donde él sí vaya a tener que escuchar o hablar el idioma, ya que no lo domina del todo. Y bueno, esta es nuestra matriz y luego seguimos con lo que era la matriz de soluciones. En la entrada, uno de los patrones que habíamos visto era lo del panorama, ya que en la entrada, ya que esto permitiría que al momento de llegar debería visualizar un espacio abierto y con vistas directas hacia el interior para ubicarse mejor dentro del espacio. En cuanto al área de visualización de información del tren, el resultado que deseábamos era reducir el estrés del usuario, ya que teníamos, sí, y que se pueda concentrar mejor, y por ello consideramos dos patrones, formas y patrones biomórficos y conexión de los materiales con la naturaleza, y así dentro del diseño generar referencias naturales, ya sea texturas o sistemas numéricos que él pueda reconocer y se reconozcan en cualquier parte, y implementar sonidos propios de la naturaleza como fondo para que pueda concentrarse mejor dentro de este espacio. Y bueno, también dentro del vestíbulo y el kiosco de entradas, ya que tenía un nivel de estrés 4, consideramos algunos patrones. Uno de ellos que no habíamos considerado antes era la presencia de agua, ya que escuchar o observar los espejos de agua, por ejemplo, si ponemos espejos de agua, ayudaría a que reduzca su estrés. Y bueno, nos falta ordenar un poco las ideas, pero este es nuestro...
This is quite good.
Creo que hay otro.
¿Puedo compartir? Buenas tardes.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sí, bueno, dentro del perfil habíamos considerado una familia de 4 integrantes con 2 niños. Habíamos hecho como flujo que ya habíamos explicado en la primera presentación, que era el flujo alto en ciertos espacios más concurridos, en el flujo moderado de color amarillo y el flujo más bajo que vendría a ser el color verde. Bueno, luego hicimos lo que vendría a ser la evaluación según para el tiempo de permanencia, que el 5 que era de 1 hora más, y el menor que era 1 de 1 a 5 minutos. Esta tabla nos daba que, bueno, algunas áreas tenían mayor nivel de estrés que otras áreas. Asimismo, al final nos quedamos con las áreas que eran prioritarias a analizar, que vendría a ser, bueno, el que vendría a ser el tiempo de permanencia en el espacio y el estrés generado dentro de esta estación del tren. Y bueno, los que tendrían mayor nivel, por así decirlo, de tiempo de permanencia vendría a ser al momento de registrarse, con media hora o un poco más. Entonces, este tiempo que esperaban, pues generaba un estrés en la familia, ¿no? Y más si están con niños. Entonces, se aplicó algunas soluciones bueno, del diseño biofílico. Bueno, como como espacio, obtuvimos lo que vendría a ser el vestíbulo de ticket, y el impacto, bueno, como prioridad era reducir el tiempo de permanencia y asimismo reducir el estrés. Algunos patrones a utilizar fue la conexión directa con materiales naturales, asimismo con la naturaleza, y bueno, esta hospitalidad al momento de llegada, ¿no? Al momento de registrarse, porque es el primer espacio a intervenir. Luego, algunas posibles intervenciones de diseño, como vendrían a ser jardines verticales, ¿no? También tener esa doble altura, ¿no? Una altura mayor para que se sienta el ambiente no tan compacto. También la textura natural, como en los espacios, como vendría a ser algún tipo de bambú o madera, entre otros materiales. Y propio también que los materiales, ya sea al momento de registrarse, hay algunos mobiliarios, ¿no? Fijos, móviles, que también vendrían a ser de materialidad natural. Y bueno, eso sería nuestro análisis como grupo.
I like it. I think it's a really good thought process. And I love the idea of the vertical gardens. I think that's really fun.
Muy bien, chicas.
Gracias.
¿Alguien más? Si no, ya alguna pregunta que tengan a Bill. Podríamos pasar horas hablando de biofilia y analizando proyectos, ¿no? O sea, eso es solo un tema introductorio que ustedes ya han visto que hay posibilidades de desarrollo muy grandes, ¿no? Hay una pregunta de Sebastián, que actualmente hay 15 patrones de diseño biofílico. ¿Estos podrían ir aumentando en el futuro?
Maybe. We started with 14. And we suspected that, so number 15, awe, was one that we suspected, but we thought it might be actually a combination of existing patterns happening together. We later learned through some new science that it's a very distinct experience, both physiologically and in the brain. And so just over the last about 3 years is when there's finally been enough science to establish that pattern number 15. So I suspect there are more out there, and as more people do research, I think we might find some more, which would be awesome.
Exacto, y Bill también ha dejado varios libros como referencias también para que ustedes puedan investigar. Hay una pregunta más de Carmen Cuba: ¿cómo se relaciona la biofilia con la resiliencia para recuperar un lugar?
So one of the things that we like to emphasize is that the design solution should support local biodiversity, and should, whenever possible, reference local ecosystems. And we hope as an outcome that people having biophilic design experiences will develop a greater love for place and greater love for environment and natural ecosystems. And so that's kind of one of our long-term goals, is how people love where they are.
Bill, tenemos una otra pregunta más de Roy Mori. La biofilia, ¿qué diferencias tiene con la arquitectura climática o la arquitectura verde o el diseño orgánico?
They can overlap. So obviously bioclimatic design is a response to the temperature and airflow and sunshine and the components of a place. And a lot of bioclimate design is really focused on minimizing energy use or using natural energy flows. So really, really important. With green design, a lot of green design is focused on, or sustainable design is focused on minimizing the environmental impact of buildings, all of which is incredibly important. Biophilic design is adding another layer to all of that and looking at how the spaces impact the users. So we're hoping that people are doing both at the same time. They're doing bioclimatic design and they're doing biophilic design.
Tiene una definición que yo me acuerdo del libro de Stephen Keller, que dice que la función entre el diseño bioclimático, la arquitectura verde y el diseño biofílico es que lo que se va a generar como una arquitectura regenerativa. Me parece interesante esa definición para, digamos, complementar, ¿no? ¿Alguna otra pregunta, chicos? alguna sugerencia, algo que les pareció del curso, si no, ya terminamos, que tenemos que continuar ahí con aquí está el link de registro, y tenemos que continuar con la siguiente charla de Field Tab, que va a hablar ya de un tema también vinculado al diseño biofílico el día de hoy, sino más al tema del urbanismo, ¿no?
So there are lots of resources out there. There are a number of publications available off our website. And we have a book out called Nature Inside, Biophilic Design Guide. There are some fantastic books that Stephen Kellert wrote. And also Phil Tabb has got some great books on urban design and biophilia. And so I think you'll have a great experience with Phil's presentation as well. I thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of our thoughts, and thank you for your participation and level of care and thought that you put into the exercises. Thank you so much.
Bueno, gracias, Bill. Thank you, Bill, for your attention today. It's a pleasure to have you here. And see you next time. Ok, chicos, gracias. Nos vemos de aquí un ratito. Bye, bye. Bill, you have control, so you need to close the session.
Okay, I will end it now.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Talk to you
Bye-bye.
soon.